There's nothing in the caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly. Like the caterpillar, we have become engrossed in consuming. We have gorged ourselves on the fruit of a poison tree.
Now, it's interesting because in the legal profession, they will talk about what they call fruit of a poison tree. And that means that if the way something is originated is corrupt, the result is also, and the understanding is that if something is created in a corrupt way, it's cursed, it's tainted. And I think that this understanding, that if something is created in a corrupt way, it is cursed and tainted, really applies to the United States. The United States was created with the genocide of Native Americans. It was created with the transatlantic slave trade. And the United States was created in a very corrupt way, and it's maintained its power through war and militarism and destruction. There is a real possibility of a whole new America being created. But there's no question that the country must be reborn. The country will have to be reborn on new values: kindness, brotherhood, sisterhood, compassion, solidarity. Right? We won't be simply trying to fix up and repair the old system. We'll be building a whole new country. We'll be building a whole new country where profits are no longer in command and trade can be done on the basis of win-win cooperation. The possibilities for humanity are massive. We are actually living in a time full of great potential. And this can be a time that's very alienating. This can be a time in which so many of us are hopeless and worried and scared. But I think we should be optimistic. And an important part of our optimism is that we must always be clear that we don't advocate violence. We don't advocate destruction. We don't advocate terrorism. We would favor a peaceful transition. All of America's people could come together and through the democratic process enact a new system. And we don't want to bring destruction and chaos. We want peace. We want justice. We don't want to destroy America. We want a whole new America built on a new foundation of justice and solidarity and brotherhood, sisterhood, community. And we are living in a very exciting time. These times are so full of suffering and fear, but at the same time, they're full of great potential. And the way out is building a new America, fighting for a government of action that will fight for working families.
The United States has grown from the 1493 Doctrine of Discovery, which stated that any land not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered, claimed, and exploited by Christian rulers, and barbarous nations be overthrown and brought into the faith itself.
Invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever. Reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and convert them to his and their use and profit. Anyone know what I'm reading here? These are the words of Pope Nicholas V in a papal bull, or an official edict of the Catholic Church in 1452. This papal bull, followed by many others from 1452 to 1493, collectively became known as what's called the Doctrine of Discovery. The Doctrine of Discovery is this series of papal bulls that is the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever lands you find not ruled by Christian rulers, those people are less than human, and the land's yours for the taking. It was this Doctrine of Discovery that allowed European nations to colonize Africa and enslave the African people. It was also this Doctrine of Discovery that let Columbus, who was lost at sea, land on a continent inhabited by millions and claim to have discovered it, because there were no people here. The notion of discovery is a racist colonial concept that assumes the dehumanization of people of color. If you don't believe me, I welcome you to put your car keys and your smartphones out in front of you. and I will come by and discover them for you. Discovery requires the dehumanization of the people who are already there. Otherwise, I would be stealing them. The doctrine of discovery is a systemically racist doctrine. In 1763, King George drew a line down the Appalachian Mountains. And he said to the colonies that they no longer had the right of discovery of all lands west of Appalachia. This upset the colonists, and so they wrote a letter of protest. In their letter, they accused the king of raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. They went on in this letter to write that he has excited the domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages. They signed this letter July 4th, 1776. 30 lines below the statement, all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. The only reason they said all men is because they had a very narrow definition of who was and who was not human. There it is, right here. Merciless Indian savages. The Declaration of Independence is a systemically racist document. A few years later, the colonists wrote down the words, "We the people of the United States," in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. However, just a few lines later, Article 1, Section 2, they never mention women, they exclude natives, and they count Africans as 3/5 of a person. Clearly, we the people does not mean everybody. We the people means white landowning males. Now maybe you're thinking, but wait, we corrected that. Yeah, and then about 90 years later, we passed the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment extended the right of citizenship to any person born under the jurisdiction of the government in this continent. However, that did not give women the right to vote. That didn't come until 1910 with women's suffrage. It did not include natives because we weren't seen as allegiant to the government, and we didn't come into the nation until 1924. It did extend the right of citizenship to former slaves. But we often forget that it was the 14th Amendment in 1970 that was part of Roe versus Wade that was now used to conclude that unborn babies are not human and therefore they can be aborted. What this demonstrates is that the heart of our Constitution is not a value for life, but a practice of dehumanization and a value for exploitation and profit. Therefore, the Constitution of the United States is a systemically racist document that assumes the dominant has the right to decide who is and who is not human. In 1823, two men of European descent were in litigation over a piece of land. One bought the land from the government, the other bought the land from a native tribe. They wanted to know who owned it. In deciding the case, the court had to decide the principle upon which land titles were based. And they decided that the principle was that discovery gave title to the government by whose subject or by whose authority was made against all other European governments, which title might be consummated by possession. The court essentially went on to say that based on the doctrine of discovery, natives only had the right of occupancy to land, while Europeans had the right of discovery to the land and therefore the true title to it. This created a Supreme Court legal precedent for land titles, the reason you can buy and sell property in the United States, that was referenced by the court as recently as 2005. The United States Supreme Court is a systemically racist court with legal precedent based on the dehumanization of people of color.
Fed by genocidal land theft, slavery, and labor exploitation, white male America developed into a behemoth now guided by the Project for a New America. PNAC's stated goal was to promote American global leadership. The organization stated that the American leadership is good both for America and for the world, and sought to build support and a Reaganite policy of military strength and moral clarity for preemptive war.
The Project for the New American Century, which is a think tank that was around in the 90s and up through 2005 or 6, and then it disappeared, and then came back online in 2009 when the coast was clear and clearly nobody was getting prosecuted for anything. And there are about 17 members of this so-called think tank who were in top positions in the Bush-Cheney administration, advisor to the president, to the vice president, assistant secretary of defense, and so forth. And a couple of these guys, Feith and Wolfowitz, had earlier worked for Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel and put out a paper that advocated the same kind of program that they then put out papers from PNAC advocating, that is intense nationalism and militarism and going after Middle Eastern states with aggressive wars. And this is what PNAC urged on President Bill Clinton, who agreed with them and made regime change in Iraq one of his goals. And there are several key papers that they published, and the biggest one maybe was in 2000 called Rebuilding America's Defenses, as if they needed to somehow be rebuilt, which was advocating a much larger military, the ability to fight multiple simultaneous wars, an aggressive agenda of going after nations in key regions of American interest, including resource regions, the need to plunder other people's resources. And a lot of it is language about absolute dominance and maintaining control of the world and fending off any possible rival. This is in the shadows of the Cold War having ended and the need existing for some new enemy, and they haven't quite come up with international terrorism or Al-Qaeda yet to fill that gap, but they want to take this opportunity to maintain American dominance. And you look at what Wesley Clark said about the list of nations that Donald Rumsfeld had, 7 nations we were going to go into in 5 years if the Iraqi people hadn't fought back, I guess. If you look at what these people say in NATO meetings, and there's one happening right now, it's about the irresistible temptation of being able to put bases and weapons, including nuclear weapons, in a country that borders just about every critical country they want to face off against in the world, and Afghanistan is in that location. And knowing full well that it's hopeless and it's a question of how much blood, how much treasure before they pull out, they just can't help themselves. I don't think it's about preventing wars. I think it's about dominating the globe.
Thanks. We are 4% of the world's population, consuming 25% of the resources. We see Christian and white supremacists hopped up on delusion and denial or fighting to keep the status quo of injustice and inequality. Nobody ever talks about this part, the part where you're no longer a caterpillar and not yet a butterfly. You don't know who you are and you don't know where you're going. All you know is that every fiber of your being is calling for transformation, for disruption, the revolution of the spirit. So surrender, break down. This is not the death of you. This is the dying of who you once were. This is your rebirth, darling, and these are called growing pains. While part of us are being further dissolved by rage and hate, many more of us are forming affinity cells, not yet knowing the new configuration. We are exploring many paths of serenity and love. Some are working on third parties, state by state. People's Party of North Carolina, Movement for People's Party, New York People's Assembly, People's Party of Florida. Meanwhile, citizens' lobbies and citizens' unions are developing citizen legislation and organization outside the current system.
And I have a question for Louise about the Citizen Assembly. And I was particularly curious about how the random selection process works, and wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that.
So it was stratified random selection. So it was basically every fourth house, the chap was knocking on the door. Now, if you understand where I live in the middle of nowhere, so it's quite unusual that anybody would ever knock on my door. So that was it. He had his demographics, he had his stratified. He was trying to fill his. He asked me a bunch of questions at the start. Age, background, whatever. He was trying to categorize me to see if he needed one of me, and turned out he did, and so that's how it worked. He worked for a private polling company, so it went out to tender. The government put it out to tender to a polling company who would often go around and do kind of market research type polls. So it was a guy from that company.
So just to speak a little bit about within the Citizens Assembly that I was a part of, it was very important for us as a group, and each weekend we had a different table and a different group. We were intentionally mixed every time. So a very important part of our method of operation was our code of conduct and the facilitation at the tables. So without strong facilitators at each table, you better be really careful, because some people can take over the conversation and that can be very demotivating for others. So from just a day-to-day part, it's very important to have really good facilitators. What was interesting for me personally that happened outside of the Citizens Assembly was the skills that you learn as part of a group like an assembly. Those are skills that you're going to have for the rest of your life. They are skills that you're mirroring from others, you're learning from watching others. It's just from being in the room, you're seeing how to have very difficult conversations, how to find common ground, how to ask questions. Now, obviously, one of the topics that we were talking about was really personal and a very difficult topic, and I thought maybe that was why we were all being so polite and nobody was really kind of saying what they felt, or and I genuinely thought, okay, that's why this is like this. But it was actually the same for all the other topics. The tone was set where people were just curious. There was an atmosphere of curiosity, and there was also an atmosphere of people took this very seriously. They took it very seriously. They thought, I've been asked to do this really important job, and I'm going to take it really seriously, and I'm going to do my best. I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to try to understand all this crazy stuff that these absolute PhD head people are saying to me, and I have no idea what they're saying. And you're trying to make sense of people who have 10 years of academic learning and deep, 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 deep knowledge on a subject. And you're just coming in off the street, and you have no idea about some of these topics at all, and you're trying your best to listen to that, to try to contextualize it, to try and discuss it, to try and piece it apart, and then to try and say, right, well, what can we do next that's going to be impactful, that's going to make a change, that's going to be meaningful? Because the worst thing you can do in a situation like that is to make recommendations that are going to be defunct, almost immediately. You want to be thinking about, right, what's the current situation, but what's the future situation, and can we do things now that are going to prevent us being in this situation down the line? So it's really to try and put your future head on as well. So the skills that you learn, and you also then you become motivated, not just politically but socially. So it mobilized a lot of women that had never even considered politics or social engagement on any level. So if you can get people to engage with the process, from the next step, you don't know, you have a little champion and they're going to go off and they're going to create all sorts of conversations with people, and they're going to educate each other, and everybody brings each other along the way.
Vote with the American Union.
Are you an American frustrated with the gridlock in Washington? Would you like to see our country end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars? The American Union is a block of swing voters supporting a specific legislative package that will do those three things. It's a blueprint for a better America. We can end poverty with universal basic income, $300 per week for adults, $100 a week for kids. We can end mass incarceration with police and prison reforms, and end the endless wars. It's time to bring our troops home. Third parties don't work, but as a block of swing voters, we can be the deciders in the upcoming elections, not spoilers. We are united in demanding a better social contract in exchange for our support. End poverty, end mass incarceration, end the endless wars. It's a blueprint for a better America. While Democrats and Republicans try to divide us, an American Union can unite us. Learn more at our website, unamericanunion.com. Together we rise.
Citizen Climate Lobby.
The climate is changing. Extreme weather is disrupting livelihoods and food supplies around the world. This is observed. This is documented. This is the scientific community's consensus. The climate is changing. Carbon emissions are driving that change. Emissions come from burning fossil fuels. So if we want to slow or even reverse the change, we must lower our fossil fuel use. By charging a fee on fossil fuels and returning that revenue to households as a dividend, we can do just that, starting a chain of positive effects. Fossil fuels become less desirable. Cleaner sources of energy become more competitive. The dividend creates millions of jobs. Carbon emissions go down, reduced air pollution saves tens of thousands of lives, and climate change is brought under control. We can make this happen, but enacting a carbon fee and dividend isn't in our hands, it's in theirs. How do we sway them? What can we do? We can use our voices to express political will and demand action. We must help our elected leaders work together. It's on us to tell them what we want as a group. Because when voices call out together, their impact multiplies. Government can respond to the will of the people, provided we tell the government what we want. And what we want is a livable world. This is what Citizens Climate Lobby works for. To empower citizens to connect with and influence their members of Congress. To spread the idea that each one of us can address climate change. Bring your voice to citizensclimatelobby.org.
Citizens Guide to Lobbying Congress. Citizens in Action. A Guide to Influencing Government. And the Blueprint for a Better America. End poverty, mass incarceration, end the endless wars. Together we rise.
Welcome to the Phoenix Congress, 21 public hearings on the 2022 legislative package, where we are writing a blueprint for a better America. This legislative package will end poverty with universal basic income, end mass incarceration with major criminal justice reform, and end the endless wars by bringing our troops home and reducing our military budget. Before starting, I'd like to invite you to join us in reciting the preamble to the Constitution of the United States to remind us of our duties as Americans and set the intention for what we are trying to do today. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
Question 1 is the short title and table of contents. The bill is divided into 5 titles, one for each of the 5 duties in the preamble of the Constitution, starting with establish justice. And we'll be doing hearings on those over the next 6 or 7 weeks. To establish justice, we've broken this down into 3 subtitles. Each one deals with police reforms, one deals with prison reforms, and one deals with prosecutorial reforms. Second title is ensure domestic tranquility, and it creates the framework for a truce on 2 of the most polarizing issues in America, guns and abortion. As a block of swing voters, we need a way to bridge the gap between partisan, between the threats. We need a way to diffuse the threat that one party is going to take away guns or abortion. And so we address that in Title II, where both sides get concessions and make concessions. In Title III, provide for the common defense, we address America's military. In Subtitle A, by reducing the size back closer towards what the framers had in mind, a limited army. And in the second part, trying to restore America's moral standing in the world by improving a number of our policies. Title 4 is promote the general welfare. This is the American Union Jobs Program, universal basic income of $1,300 a month for adults, a third of that for kids. American Union Jobs include the opportunity to buy health insurance through a public option. And it's set on a new public payment infrastructure set up by the US Treasury to bring every American into the banking system and make sure that we can exchange money around the country for free, the way that we used to be able to do in cash when commerce was local, and which way we can do under America 4.0, we'll be able to do across the internet and take advantage of modern technology. Title 5 is securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, and the way that we secure those is through voting. And so Title 5 includes universal suffrage, and as part of the clawbacks for universal basic income includes some fees on pollution to better protect our children's inheritance. That, Mr. Chair, I think that concludes my testimony for Section 1.
In conclusion, as much as I want to move forward, people of privilege must hear and share the hard truth of how we got here. POP must make amends and atone. Not just reparations, but to see the radical white Christian right as willing victims of indoctrination, propaganda, and spiritual abuse, not to be trusted, listened to, tolerated, or allowed.
A California reparations task force is making history with a major decision on who will receive compensation. The first of its kind task force was put together by Governor Gavin Newsom back in 2020. Now, after hours of testimony and debate, the group has voted 5-4 that reparations should be paid to descendants of black slaves who were living in the United States during the 19th century. Chairperson of the California Reparations Task Force, Camila Moore, joins me now with a little bit more on all of this. Camila, thank you for being here. I know that California is the only state in the U.S. to move ahead with a study and a plan for reparations like this. So how has this process been to try to figure this all out?
Hi, thank you for having me. We started the California Reparations Task Force meeting in June of last year. And since June, we've held a series of virtual public hearings on a variety of topics, but starting with the transatlantic slave trade, to the institution of slavery, to more contemporary harms against African Americans in California and the United States more broadly, around predatory lending practices, environmental racism, racism in banking, tax, and labor, amongst other issues as well. And so we've had an ongoing conversation about who should be eligible for reparations, and we finally resolved that question yesterday afternoon.
Now, what were some of the key issues that you faced during all these ongoing discussions and debates?
Right. And so the framing around the community of eligibility to the task force was around, should it be race-based, so all Black Californians, regardless of national or even immigrant origin, or should it be lineage-based, so where you can, trace your ancestry to an enslaved or free African-American person who was living in the United States prior to the 19th century. And so there were amazing arguments on both sides. But 5 task force members decided, along with myself, that a lineage-based approach would be most apt.
So, Camila, how significant do you think was, one, the creation of this task force and finally reaching this decision?
Well, I think, of course, it's history in the making, and it's a long time coming. The history of lineage-based reparations advocacy literally starts during enslavement with Belinda Sutton and Callie House, who were one of the first African-American women to advocate for reparations for ex-slaves, to Queen Mother Audley Moore in the 1960s and the Black Panther Party, who also fought for reparations in their platforms, to grassroots activists today who were responsible for the enactment of AB 3121, along with Secretary of State Shirley Weber, and of course, California Governor Gavin Newsom.
So why do you think these reparations, one, why are they necessary? And what will this compensation look like? Will these be cash payments or will it come in other forms?
So the task force still has to decide what forms of compensation would look like. And we've actually hired an economic consultant team that includes Dr. Sandy Darity, William Spriggs, and other economists to help the task force crunch the numbers essentially in terms of what compensation could look like. And to your point about why reparations is important, we know that slaves were promised 40 acres and a mule, and that was rescinded due to discrimination. And so, reparations is about accounting for that broken promise of Reconstruction and repairing the transferred harms to the direct descendants of those enslaved people.
And I know this is a really complicated question, but as best as you can sum it up, how did you link those wrongs with how they're impacting people still today?
Well, that's a really good question. Because in the statute itself, AB 3121, it mandates the task force to study and develop reparations proposals on the lingering negative effects of slavery against a particular group of people, and that being freed African slaves and their descendants. So there are many different lingering or badges and incidents of slavery, like homelessness, like mass incarceration, amongst many other factors that are still a badge and incident of slavery in 2022 that has to be eradicated in order for true equity to be achieved. And so that's the historic task that we have as a 9-member task force.
All right, Camila Moore, thank you for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
These people are to be seen for the danger they are. They have been captured by a cult-like authoritarian system that they think will result in security and freedom. Media depicts them as a force to be reckoned with when they are just a loud, emotional minority that deserve to be in timeout. On the fringes, the most radical are armed and dangerous. The police entrusted to protect and serve are armed and dangerous as well. The myth is that law enforcement and military are to protect our rights and freedom, when in truth, they are protecting the status quo and corporate global imperialism.
Just 30 minutes before a jury found Derek Chauvin guilty of murdering George Floyd, Ohio police shot and killed a 16-year-old girl trying to defend herself from 2 attackers. This week, police across the country went absolutely ballistic on protesters who were demonstrating against the police killings of 2 unarmed youth, Dante Wright and Adam Toledo. It feels like May of 2020 all over again, and a lot of people are asking themselves, after all of that protesting, after all of that yelling and explaining and demanding and crying, how is it that the police are still doing all the same stuff that we've been protesting against? Why don't they understand that this is why people fear and loathe the police in this country? Why do cops look more and more like soldiers and treat us like enemy combatants? In order to answer these questions, we need to understand what purpose police serve in this society. Almost every society in history is divided into 2 groups or classes. One is a small group of wealthy and powerful elites, and the other group is everyone else, the masses of people. The rich elites are wealthy because they take whatever the masses produce through their hard labor. In feudal times, kings and queens entitled themselves to the grain harvested by peasants by saying God gave them the divine right to take anything in their kingdom. Today, a capitalist will say they own the phones or the TVs their workers produce because they pay the workers a wage worth a fraction of whatever good it is they produced, if anything, and call it a fair trade. Either way, these justifications don't exactly stand on their own logic. These arrangements are obviously exploitative, and sooner or later, the oppressed masses will realize that they massively outnumber the elites and will take back everything that's been stolen from them. The police are there to prevent this. They're a group of people lifted out of the masses who are given special privileges and rights, but also the exclusive right to commit violence in order to maintain the exploitative status quo. The same way knights existed to protect kings and queens, police exist to protect modern-day aristocrats, the billionaire class. Now, I know what you're all saying. Okay, all cops do is enforce the laws. They're just law enforcement officers. And this is true, but who's saying that the laws don't exist to protect and enrich the billionaire class either? The first police in this country were created to enforce fugitive slave laws. The Fugitive Slave Acts of 1793 and 1850, enacted by Congress, made it legal for slave owners to capture and torture slaves running away. But the police were the foot soldiers who actually carried out this sadistic work on behalf of the wealthy slave owners. Police were also tasked with protecting European settlers from Native American attacks. Of course, it was actually the Europeans attacking the natives by stealing their land and killing them indiscriminately, and police were simply there to protect what the Europeans had stolen. These slave patrols and night watches went on to form modern-day police departments. In both cases, they protected the wealth of a small landowning, slave-owning class by brutalizing and killing the masses of oppressed indigenous and black people in order to prevent them from taking back what belonged to them. Police brutality towards black people is the most consistent theme in US policing. This doesn't just have to do with the rampant racism in police departments, but also the fact that African Americans have been so disproportionately exploited by the capitalist system that they also have the most reason to overturn it. Black people are consistently on the forefront of movements calling for revolutionary change, and the ruling class knows this and fears this. This is why police are used to routinely terrorize innocent black people as a way of scaring them into not rebelling. Police are also the backbone of the anti-union and anti-socialist movements in this country. After the victory of the socialist revolution in Russia, union activity spread like wildfire throughout the United States. Inspired by the first worker-led revolution in the world, workers in the US began striking in record numbers, leveraging the power of their numbers against their wealthy bosses. Tasked with enforcing the 1918 Sedition Act, police raided the homes of anyone even suspected of being a union organizer or a socialist and deported or imprisoned them. Thousands were arrested and many people were held for months without trial. As socialism continued to spread to China, Korea, Cuba, and other parts of the third world, socialism became increasingly popular with working and oppressed people in the United States. The police were especially afraid of black radicals and black communist organizations like the Black Panther Party, who were winning the hearts and minds of black people around the country. The FBI waged a counterintelligence program known as COINTELPRO to sabotage the Black Liberation Movement. The stated goal of the program was to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah, meaning a fearless and charismatic Black revolutionary who could lead a movement of Black and other oppressed and poor people against the racist capitalist system. The FBI infiltrated several of these organizations to create infighting and spread fear and paranoia. The police were also involved in killing off several black leaders, including Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Fred Hampton. They imprisoned Angela Davis on trumped-up charges, and to this day, Assad Shakur remains on the FBI's most wanted list. Besides the fact that the police were created to suppress popular uprisings, it's also worth noting that the police literally don't protect you. Police don't stop crimes. They actually solve all of 2% of all major crimes, which, if you think about it, actually makes a lot of sense. It's not like you see a lot of cops going around doing a bunch of detective work. Most of the time, they're just standing around protecting a bank or some rich dude's football stadium.
Look up! You're protecting McDonald's! You're an idiot!
You never see police standing outside a woman's house when her crazy boyfriend is stalking and threatening to kill her. You never see the cops posted up outside of black churches or in Chinatowns protecting people from racist hate crimes. So this goes back to the original question. If cops are there to enforce the law, why is it that less than 2% of cops are prosecuted for fatal shootings? They did break the law after all. They committed murder. So why haven't they been arrested by the cops? Well, for the same reason the cops didn't arrest the bankers who defrauded hundreds of millions of people during the financial crisis. For the same reason they won't arrest Jeff Bezos for forcing his workers to piss in Gatorade bottles and wear shock bracelets. For the same reason they don't arrest the Sackler family for knowingly pushing deadly opioids on this country. The police don't enforce the laws against the rich and powerful. They enforce them against us. And it's not like they really hide it either. Every day we hear stories about cops carrying toy guns around so they can plant them on any kids they shoot, and wishing for race wars.
We're just going to go out and start slaughtering them effing N-words. I can't wait. God, I can't wait. The officer adding that a civil war is needed to, quote, and I quote him here, wipe them off the effing map. That'll put them back about 4 or 5 generations.
It feels like they're at war with us because they are at war with us. They kill our people on a daily basis and then flashbang and tear gas and shoot us with rubber bullets when we start to complain. Police departments across the country are being armed with military-grade equipment through the 1033 program, which allows the federal government to sell and give away military-grade weapons to local police departments. This is why your local police force no longer looks like this, and instead looks like this. It's hard to see civilians as anything but enemy combatants when the weapons you're holding and the gear you're wearing are tools of f***ing war. These 1033 transfers have skyrocketed under the Biden administration. The United States is currently in a period of immense crisis. Inequality and poverty are rampant, while all of the wealth is being hoarded by just a handful of modern-day aristocrats. The billionaires have an uprising on their hands, and they've responded by creating a police state. Now, while the riot cops and the tear gas might be intimidating, just remember that they're out there because they're scared of you.
The police and media are supporting the division and crisis. What we have is numbers. When the pain becomes greater than the payoff, hopefully we will come together. If this group feeds off our reaction, let that reaction be love and compassion. What will we be as a butterfly? Right now, it is to go deep into what we want to end. It is hard to say what we will be because we are all still on separate paths into the future we are working for.
I'm flashing on right now is that people come together in crisis.
Yeah, that's true.
And right now, we're really not. We don't know that we're in a crisis because we still think we have time to fight about it.
Yeah.
And when we realize that we're in a crisis and we can't fight about this anymore, that we've got to come together and resolve some of these issues. And anyway, so it's like an alcoholic or anybody doesn't change until the pain becomes greater than the payoff.
Right. Right.
And we in this country haven't felt the pain so much as what well, I haven't because I've lived a blessed life, but I'm feeling really kind of like I'm having a hard time with what we've done in the world as a nation and a people. And I'm really wanting to work on making that different.